Hey guys, and yeah, today I'm gonna try and watch Ratatoing. It's the next Video Brinquedo movie that I plan to watch, and yeah, I don't think, how could this be as bad as Little Panda Fighter? That movie was awful. So let's see, Ratatoing. This is the most obvious ripoff I have ever seen. I haven't seen it yet, but of the looks of it, this looks like a pretty, just an obvious ripoff. And it looks like it's shorter than Little Panda Fighter, less painful. So yeah, it's not gonna be as bad as Little Panda Fighter. I know that for a fact. Nothing's as bad as a Little Panda Fighter. So how could this be worse? Ratatoing is worse than the Little Panda Fighter. It is such an obvious ripoff of Ratatouille, and it is the most painful movie-going experience of my life. And I know I reviewed this film last year, but if you're wondering why I privated that video, it's because it's my most unwatchable video, and that is saying something. It is because the video has terrible mic quality. So I will review Ratatouille today, so yeah, I did watch this movie again, so I have a fresh review of it. If you don't know how these reviews work, I like to go through 4 categories: animation, story, dialogue, and laughability. So yeah, let's see. We're going to start right off with the animation. Well, believe it or not, this animation is actually better than Little Panda Fighter. And it does make sense, because this movie did come out 2 years before the Little Panda Fighter, or 2 years after the Little Panda Fighter. So why would the anime... What? It came out 2 years before the Little Panda Fighter. How? It's better rendered than the Little Panda Fighter. I don't get that. Well, the characters are still from my nightmares. They're not as uncanny as the characters from the Little Panda Fighter. Does this mean the animation doesn't suck? Nope. It's still atrocious, and it looks very strange and creepy. And there's so few backgrounds, and every single background just looks so lazy. There is no detail on anything in this movie. Everybody just looks like a rat version of Squidward, I guess. That's all the character designs. Random glitches just kind of happen in the animation. They just kind of come up and they do something. And it just feels like the animation is so atrocious. It just feels like I'm watching 44 minutes of torture. The animation in this movie is incredibly ugly, and it's so hard to look at this movie and not cringe. And the color scheme of this movie, oh my goodness, it's just so ugly. I thought Justice League's color scheme was off, but nope. No, this movie's color scheme is so terrible. And I'd like to say that this isn't the worst animation I've ever seen, because it really isn't the worst animation I've ever seen, but it is definitely one of the most painful movie-going experiences ever, because of this animation. Now the story! Why? Just why? This is the most bland story I've ever seen. It destroys the Little Panda Fighter in laziness and blandness. And so the story, if you want to call it that, is that Marcel Toying owns a restaurant called the Ratatoing. Why, though? That's like Dwayne Johnson making a restaurant called the Humana Johnson. Seriously. And how do they even know that humans call them rats? But then, someone finds out their formula and how they get their food. They go to a human kitchen, and they steal food. So then, they make sure that the humans know that there are rats going into their kitchen, and then they place a cat. So they have to get food without getting caught by the cats. Just, why? What? Why is that a thing in general? Why? I mean, I know there probably wasn't even a pitch room for this movie. It was actually probably just at someone's house. But was there literally there was someone who said, what if, and then they said this plot. And then someone agreed to it. Just think about that for a second. Someone agreed to the creation of Ratatoing. Just think about that for a second. I mean, it does make sense why, because, money. But why? And I know this isn't really involved with the story, but I forgot to mention this in the animation. Why does the cat walk on his legs? I just wanted to mention that. I really don't want to talk about this story. This doesn't really exist. There's not really any story. It's not a dumb story. It's just an incoherent story. And 15 minutes of this film are just rats complimenting the restaurants. 1/4 of the freaking movie is spent for people complimenting the restaurants. I feel like I'm just watching the same scene repeated over and over again in order to give me just torture. And believe it or not, in this movie, it actually feels like everybody is desperate for a job. Like, it feels like they just need a job, and this is what they were able to sign on to, and they're like, great, I need money to help my family, so I guess I need to sign on to this thing. The story is abysmal. There's almost nothing, there's just nothing good about this story. Nothing. The dialogue. Everyone's purpose in this movie is to just shout exposition. Not one line in this movie isn't just exposition. And I dare you to do a drinking game of every time the fat rat says precisely, you have to take a drink. And every time someone compliments the restaurant, take a drink. And then, yeah, that'll really be bad. It's easier to watch Transformers The Last Knight than this awful dialogue. And The Last Knight's dialogue is absolutely terrible. The laughability of this movie. Yeah, this movie had me laughing a lot. Not as much as The Little Panda Fighter, but I was quite laughing in this. There were so many scenes in this movie that are just so pointless. There's just one scene where they're in a white background, and they're just putting their gear on, and it's stupid, and I don't know why it's even here. But there is one thing that I found hilarious in this movie, and that was the name. Ratatoing. That's the name of this movie. I know you know that, but just think about that. Ratatoing. I just want you to think. It's going to be silent. Just think. Ratatoing. Also, there's this dance sequence in the movie that does not make any sense at all. And I feel like I'm watching a weird form of torture. And, yeah. It's laughably terrible. This is the worst ripoff ever made. I don't know how anything could beat it. And I will say that it's easier to watch than Transformers The Last Knight. How does that happen? The Last Knight is just 2.5 hours of Michael Bayism. This is just 44 minutes of torture and pain. This is often considers Video Brinquedo's worst movie, and that shows. I'm happy to hear that there are no other worse Video Brinquedo movies, and I never even want to speak of this company again. This is the most painful movie-going experience ever. It is worse than The Little Panda Fighter, not by a lot, but it is worse. It's more lazy than The Little Panda Fighter. Its animation coloring is worse. The dialogue is worse. Almost everything about this movie is worse than The Little Panda Fighter. At least the people who were voicing The Little Panda Fighter felt like the main character. Whoever voiced him, he felt like he was at least trying. This movie is absolutely abysmal in almost every single sense of the word. There is nothing good about this movie. I know I know that's pretty obvious due to a movie called Ratatoing, but sorry, I have to have some hope for something. I never will speak of Video Brinquedo's disasters, and I will never talk about this company again. I'm happy to hear that they went out of business. Ratatoing does not deserve my attention or yours.